Everyone hits a bump in the road. What do you do with it? Be inspired as we explore the ways people experience, navigate, and manage the ups and downs and twists and turns in this road trip called life. Welcome to another episode of Bump in the Road. The basic podcast is always free. We also have a premium subscription called Bump 2 that lets you listen in on extended behind-the-scenes conversations with our guests. Check it out at www.bumpintheroad.us.
Sally Lotz is an author of young adult fiction, but her book, The Truth is a Lie, is not completely fiction. It's based on a real-life experience growing up in a Jehovah's Witness household. It's a story about life in a cult and one young girl who showed the strength to escape and find a better life. Please welcome Sally to Bump in the Road. Sally, welcome to Bump in the Road. If you would, tell us your story.
Oh, good morning. Well, my story is I am now a writer and a writing coach, but I started my life in a cult. That's my life in a nutshell. I grew up in a cult where I was not allowed to pursue education or anything creative-wise. And then I married a man who tried to take me into a cult. And I've just had lots of bumps in the road, but now I'm here doing what I want to do, which is write books.
You were in your family was a Jehovah's Witness family. Talk a little bit about what that meant for you.
Yes, my father was not. My parents got divorced when I was very young. So my mother got me married when I was about 6. And that's when she found Jehovah, who was supposed to answer all of her problems and give her life eternal on paradise earth. And my life completely changed. I went from having a normal childhood, so to speak, to having no birthdays, no Christmas, no holidays, nothing. It just, I don't know if you can imagine if you're a child and you're having all these, things at school and just, Valentine's Day and going to birthday parties, and then all of a sudden being told not just that you can't have them, but celebrating those things and partaking of those things. Jehovah will not love you and you will die when he kills the rest of the world. That's the message I was told continually as a child. Yes. You cannot go to the Girl Scouts. You can't be a Girl Scout because they are a Christian organization and they meet in a church. If you're in that church when they're having a Girl Scout meeting and Jehovah decides to destroy the world at that moment, you're dead. That was the psychological warfare that was played on me daily as a child. Not to mention that my stepfather was extremely abusive. He was sexually abusive, emotionally abusive. Any way you can think of, he was. And my mother was emotionally and mentally abusive as well. And there was no recourse for me. I mean, those two things in themselves are bad, but then when they're condoned by the leadership and the rest of the people in the Jehovah's Witnesses, there's no out. You're just this child just trying to survive. So that was basically my whole childhood, was just trying to survive and figure out how to get out of there when I could.
Jehovah's Witness, from what I understand, really doesn't have, you're not allowed to celebrate holidays. It doesn't sound like there's a lot of fun or joy in that lifestyle.
There's not, but they always like to put on a happy face and pretend like there's joy and happiness when they're talking to you. And we would always have like special days as a way of trying to make up for the lack of all those days we were missing. Oh, we're going to just have a day where we all get together, and they call them gatherings or get-togethers. We're just going to have like a big party where everybody comes. And that was supposed to make up for it. But mind you, going to those events, you still had to dress properly. You couldn't just be casual. You had to dress like you were going, to a kingdom hall. So that meant I had to wear a dress. I had to be modest. And everybody was judged for whatever they were doing or speaking. And there's this whole level of hierarchy within the Jehovah's Witnesses. So even going to an event, it was painful.
How did you get out of the cult?
I was given an ultimatum when I was 16 because I had a worldly boyfriend. And that means I was talking to a boy who was not a Jehovah's Witness. I never saw him really anywhere except outside of school, and maybe if we snuck out to the library or maybe at the park. Never went on a date with him. But my mom told me that I had an ultimatum of either staying with Jehovah or going with the boy. And I chose the boy. But this ultimatum came after someone in the congregation told my mom, reported me for having a boyfriend. That in turn, I was pulled in to have a meeting with the elders. Now, the elders are the men only who run the congregation, and it's usually 4 or 5 older men. I went into a room by myself with 3 old men. They probably in their 40s by the time they were old. 16-year-old girl in a room by herself, and I was questioned very sexually explicit questions that I was like, I don't even know what you're talking about. Here I had been holding hands basically with this boy. And that's when it clicked in me how much I needed to get out of this, because here I was living at home with a pedophile and all of the abuse that was going on. And these men knew that because they had brought my stepfather in. Other people had reported him. All he did was say he was sorry, he wouldn't do it anymore, and he would come right home. They told my mother not to call the police. They told my mother to just rely on Jehovah. They said, don't do anything. You're doing something wrong. You're not doing the right thing for your husband. So that was all in my mind when I'm sitting here being corrected and disciplined for holding hands with a boy. And that's when the light switch says, okay, I'm done. I'm getting out. So when my mom gave me that ultimatum, she made it easy for me. I said, I choose the boy.
Where did you go?
So at that time, I have a dad. I did not spend much time with my dad growing up because part of the Jehovah's Witnesses is keeping you separate from the outside world. And my father was also in the Navy, so he was deployed a lot. So I probably saw my dad once a week, 1 week every 2 years or 3 years. So sometimes once it was 3 years. So I ended up going to live with my dad in San Diego at age 16. And I had to stay in the house for 2 months because he had to arrange, because he was still active duty in the Navy. So he had to arrange for me to come there and, make sure I had a place and that he wasn't going to be leaving again. So that was culture shock for me, though, because I went from this home of being abused, being told what to do, being told what to wear, being watched continually. Everything I did was controlled, to a home where it was just me and my dad. And I didn't really know anything about life. And I was terrified because only men in my life at this point were terrible. So thankfully I had that place to go to. Otherwise I would have been on the street, which happens to many teenagers. Or they stay. That's what most people do. They stay and pretend to be still a Jehovah's Witness because they don't have an alternative.
Oh, that's terrifying.
The alternative is you lose your entire family. You lose all your friends. Yeah.
You lose your identity, an identity that never suited you.
Yes. So you stay in a fake identity because that's all you know, for one thing, and you don't know how to survive because you've never been given those skills. And yeah, a lot of people end up sadly committing suicide or leaving and like floundering for a long time until they find their way in something.
What was involved in making that adjustment into a so-called normal society?
It took me a long time. I never believed in Jehovah. I never believed in what they taught me, but I still had all that trauma from growing up in that house. And so that's what I didn't deal with. And so I got married really young because I thought that's what I needed. I thought I needed someone to take care of me. And really, I didn't. I should have taken that time to heal. But also back then, we didn't do that. It wasn't like now where it's all over the place, where you can just call somebody, right? You could go online and talk to somebody. So it wasn't out there. So I got married to a gentleman who was older than me. And everything was hunky-dory. I wanted to be, like Miss June Cleaver and have my kids. And I did. I had my 3 kids. But I never really healed. So I was just burying all that stuff until finally one day I couldn't bury it anymore. And I started having severe panic attacks, but no understanding of what it was, where it was coming from. So it took me a while to discover what started them again, or what started them and what they were from. And so what started them was my husband at the time was starting to go to this church that was a Bill Gothard church, who I don't know if you're aware of him, but he's a big cult. If you've ever heard of the Duggars, the 16 Kids and Counting, they've had all of these shows on TLC, and they just did a big expose about the group they belong to, and it's another cult. And so when he started to go to this church, the red flags started waving, and that brought me back to that place when I was a kid, and all that stuff started coming out again. And I got to a point where I couldn't leave the house. It was so bad. That's when I don't know how it happened, but somehow I got one of Dr. Phil's books, got in my hands. I don't know if I bought it or someone gave it to me. But at that time, he wasn't on Oprah or anything. It was just a book. And so as I was reading it, I began to understand what was going on with me, as I had some severe depression. And I walked through his steps, and then I started to go to therapy, because I realized what was going on was I had all this anger that I had turned in on myself and hadn't dealt with the past. And that's where I started writing. Because that was part of what my therapy was to start writing letters. But I started writing feelings. I started writing poems. I started writing, it's kind of my healing. And then we got divorced. And that was like my road to becoming better. That was until I got married again. Because we think we're all healed. We think we're so smart, right? It's like, yeah, I fixed everything. I'm good. But, and I was, but I should have waited. I should have done more digging on the person who I married before I married him, and would have been good.
Trauma is interesting in that I have this theory that the first half of our lives, we experience a lot of trauma, and we react however we react. Often we internalize it. And then the second half of our life is, if we're aware at all, trying to strip it away and find ourselves again. And your book is just really mesmerizing. One of the things that really hit me in your book was just so much betrayal in so many ways. And one of the scenes that just stuck with me was when your family had that young woman move in for a while,
Mm-hmm.
and your mother went into your room, took all your stuff, some of it just, went into the garage, I believe,
Mm-hmm.
and you were sent to bed to sleep with your two sisters. You didn't have a bed. You were sleeping on the floor, but it was
Mm-hmm.
such a personal violation
Mm-hmm.
of space. And thankfully, she didn't find your journals where you were, drawing and writing and everything.
Yeah.
But that scene just, it so sticks with me. It's just a total betrayal.
Yeah. My belongings were always gone through. I didn't have anything private. I read the book, Judy Blume's Forever, and I couldn't bring it home. So I had to read it at school. And thankfully back then we had lockers, so I could leave it in my locker. But there's a lot of things I couldn't bring them home because I knew that they would be found and I would be in trouble. So I didn't want to get in trouble. Yeah. So that scene, that actually happened. But I moved into my older sister's room and slept on her floor. And she literally told me that I could have no drawers. She gave me like a shoebox, my sister, and said, "This is where you can put your stuff. Don't mess up my room." That was how I lived for the first half of my freshman year in high school, sleeping on the floor on a sleeping bag.
Kind of the antithesis of our materialistic society. Did you ever rebel against that in a materialistic way later on?
No, I haven't ever been like very materialistic, but for me, my kids had their own rooms and they got to have them however they wanted to have them. So if they wanted to put their furniture a certain way, they could put it that way. All I asked was it was cleaned up. I never went through their stuff. Yeah.
One of the things I take away from your book, which is called The Truth is a Lie, is I think in a way, bear with me on this, all families are a cult. All families have their own rules, the things you can't talk about, the things you can't do, but obviously not to that extreme.
Mm-hmm.
When you look back on it all, what do you take out of it in terms of the personal strength that you found within yourself in going through all this?
I think my personal strength is, that's a hard question. Because I know a lot of people who haven't been able to get out and have gone different routes, some of which weren't good. I think that my outlook on life has always been a positive outlook, and that they're wrong and I'm right. It sounds terrible, but I'm a Virgo. And so I'm a methodical person, and I like to know why things work. And if it doesn't make sense in my head, then I don't do it. And so making sense in my head was get out of there and do better. Because if I do better and I'm a better person than what they ever told me that I could be, then I win and they lose. And that's the advice I give people who are leaving, is don't let them win the game. Do better than what they said you could do. Take little baby steps at a time and just do better. And before you know it, you'll be way, way out there doing your own thing, being yourself, and you win. And they lose.
Your ability to hold on to your sanity through this is really remarkable.
Well, I lost it, remember? I lost it for a while. But at that point where I lost it, I had a choice of either just stay in that place of darkness and unhappiness or make it better. And so that the dark place, I think, is where a lot of people turn to drugs, where they turn to alternatives and they try to mask everything and hide everything. I could have gone that route, but I didn't.
Why didn't you?
I'm a fixer. I like to fix things. So I felt like it was fixable. Whatever was wrong with me, I just needed to figure out what it was. That's part of that methodical thing. what's going on? What's happening here? How can I fix this? I think also I'm a creative person. And so I visualize and I can see things. So I knew there was a light at the end of the tunnel.
The reason I ask that question is I am fascinated by why some people make it through these terrible things and others don't. And I think the majority of people do not make it through. Mm-hmm. And I'm always wonder, what is it within some of us that we can find that strength to get through really terrible things?
Yeah, it's hard. I know when I was a kid and my mom made this change, I had something happen to me that stuck with me visually. It was visceral and it was real, and it made an impact on me. And it's kind of woven in the book. If you saw about the butterflies, I have the butterfly tattoo here. It was something that happened with a butterfly. And I asked God to show me if Jehovah was real or he was real. And I got my answer from that butterfly. So I held on to that little visual thing my whole life, just saying, okay, they're wrong. They're not real. I just have to keep going. As a kid, though, and I talked to my siblings, all we were trying to do was just to survive and get out of that house. And however we could do it. A couple of my siblings didn't do it very well. 4 of them are still in it. But those of us who got out, one of them didn't do very well. He had a life of drugs and alcohol. And my other brother, he's like me. He got out and he had married a wonderful woman and they have great children. So I don't know if it's genetic or if it's brain waves or what it is. For my brother and I, who both got out without those lasting effects of having to turn to drugs or alcohol, we both kind of have the same mindset of discovering things and why things work and step by step and things making sense. Why we do things that make sense.
Today, do you have a spiritual life?
I do. I have a spiritual life. People ask me that a lot. Do you still believe in God? I go, I believe in God. I don't believe in Jehovah. I don't believe in the Jehovah's Witness cult. I'm not a religious person. I go to church, but I don't go to a religion. I believe in faith. And there's evidence of it for me. And that's what I do. I have a hard time going to churches where they start telling me all the things I can't do. And
or the sense that you're inherently evil or wrong, where that seems to be the antithesis of a spiritual teaching.
Yeah. And to me, that's not the message that Jesus gives in the Bible. And so that's what I follow. I am Christian. I'm just, like I said, I'm not religious, because I tell people religion is what killed Jesus. If you're a Christian, you get that.
What advice would you have for anybody, any young person stuck in a very difficult family situation?
Okay, so from the young person's point of view, it's important that you have somebody outside of your family, somebody that you trust, whether it's a teacher, a guidance counselor, or maybe you do have a trusted friend, their parents. You need to talk to them and be open. Tell them what's going on. Make a plan for yourself. I've heard some people as kids were able to get jobs and they were able to save some money and put it aside and get out. But the most important thing is to find some mentors and some trusted people who can help you. Don't try to do it alone. If you can't find people around you, there's online help. I know there's counselors that you can get that are online. I don't know the age group that you have to be. But that's what I think is just find somebody you can trust.
If you
which is hard.
It's very hard because when you think about it, who are the adults in your life? Teachers who may or may not report back to your parents, maybe parents' friends who are they really trustworthy, or a neighbor, are they really trustworthy? It's as a child, it's very hard to know how adults communicate, what they communicate, and whether or not they'll believe you.
So, it would depend upon the age. And this is why I tell, the overall message in my book is to be kind to others around you because you don't know what they're going through. And if you're an adult, I've had a lot of adults who were teachers who read my book and they said, I never knew this stuff was going on. This kind of thing could be happening with these children who are so isolated. I never knew they were so isolated. And I said, well, just start opening up and be that person, because they might come to you 5 years from now when they're in junior high. They might come back to you. So you just never know.
If you could rewrite your story, would you?
Yes. I missed out on a lot of stuff. I missed out on having a relationship with my dad and all of my family outside of my siblings. I don't really have a relationship with my siblings. I never got, to go to the prom, sports, any of the school dances, anything that you did as a child, I didn't get to do it. So I would love to do that. And I would write some people out.
Thank you for listening. I hope you'll support this podcast by becoming a Bump 2 subscriber. Buy us a cup of coffee. It's your support that makes this podcast and website possible. I hope you found something in today's podcast that inspires you along your own life's path, because sometimes a bump in the road is actually a portal into a more conscious and meaningful life.